Hey people, this is my review for The Dark Knight Rises and the third part of my superhero movie battle of 2012 video series. For those of you who don't know, I'm doing reviews for The Avengers, The Amazing Spider-Man, and The Dark Knight Rises. And when it's all said and done, the final box office results are in and there's a critical consensus for each of these movies. I'm going to declare which movie I think was the winner of this year. Like Batman Begins, The Dark Knight left us with an ending that could have been a satisfying conclusion to the story if they chose to leave it there. Yet, at the same time, it created a desire to see where things would go. Loving these two movies as much as I did, I put a lot of thought into how to give this series the best conclusion possible. As I started to learn about The Dark Knight Rises, it became clear that this would be quite different from the follow-up I had envisioned. I'll admit that I've had some bias against this movie due to the pride I felt toward my own ideas. However, I always hoped that I would be proven wrong about The Dark Knight Rises. I did my best to keep an open mind and wanted to like this movie. In fact, after the rave reviews that some critics and many of my fellow fans had given this movie, I drove to the movie theater fully expecting to come out satisfied and raving about how Christopher Nolan had just completed the greatest movie trilogy of all time. However, The Dark Knight Rises drops the ball in some major ways. Being as objective as I can, I won't say that The Dark Knight Rises is a bad movie. Like pretty much everything Christopher Nolan works on, it's well made. The acting is great all around. Christian Bale convincingly takes Bruce Wayne through this final part of the journey as the character goes through several stages. Michael Caine delivers his best performance of the series as Alfred, providing some of the movie's most emotional moments. Gary Oldman isn't given as much to work with as he was in the other movies, but he's still great as an older, wearier Jim Gordon. Joseph Gordon-Levitt brings a humble, everyman charm to the character of John Blake, who might actually be my favorite character in the movie. Anne Hathaway makes Catwoman her own, but I couldn't fully get into this version of the character. At this point, I'm unsure if that is more about her portrayal of the character or the role the character plays in the story. Tom Hardy does a great job of portraying a very powerful and commanding Bane. I think the appearance of Bane's mask makes him even more intimidating by evoking the image of a muzzle placed on a dangerous dog, or the restraint mask worn by Hannibal Lecter. Heath Ledger's Joker was a very tough act to follow, but Bane is such a different character that he really doesn't get overshadowed by the memory of the Joker. The action in the movie is on a much grander scale, and the fight scenes are the best of the trilogy. However, some of the action scenes lack the spark of their counterparts in the earlier Batman movies. I think one of the things that can make an action scene memorable is the inclusion of fun moments that take the audience by surprise. For example, The Dark Knight has an exciting chase sequence that concludes with Batman using the pod to flip a tractor trailer, then effortlessly executing a quick turn by running the pod's front wheel up a wall. The chase scenes as well as the other action scenes of The Dark Knight Rises lack those fun moments that can induce an audible reaction from a crowd and make audiences smile even upon repeated viewings. This reflects one of my issues with The Dark Knight Rises as a whole. The majority of the movie is bleak and somber. The tone is understandable, but the movie doesn't offset the darkness with fun as well as the other movies of the trilogy. Meanwhile, most of the dramatic elements in the movie didn't make me feel very much. The plot never really managed to pull me in and engage me the way I'd come to expect from this series. This is partially because the story is somewhat unfocused. I'll elaborate more on this later, but for now I'll just say that the story really just doesn't feel as well put together as those found in either of the other movies in the series. The Dark Knight has a lot going on, but just about every story element is well developed and fits together beautifully. The Dark Knight Rises fails to develop the individual pieces to a satisfactory level and integrate them effectively. Some of the major driving forces in this movie are Bane, what he does to Bruce, and what he plans to do to Gotham. For me, Bane's ultimate goal does not feel new and interesting enough. While the threats in Batman Begins and The Dark Knight manage to feel quite different from each other, The Dark Knight Rises chooses to revisit Ra's al Ghul's plan from Batman Begins. The movie does justify the similarity within the story, but that didn't make it any more interesting for me. In fact, this time around it made less sense, and the method for executing this plan felt less fitting. At the beginning of Batman Begins, fake Ra's al Ghul says that the city has become a breeding ground for suffering and injustice. It is beyond saving and must be allowed to die. Okay, extreme, but I get that. The city is poor, crime-ridden, and corrupt, so the League of Shadows believes that to serve true justice, they have to wipe the slate clean and allow things to begin again. So how about Bane's plan? He still wants to destroy Gotham and fulfill Ra's al Ghul's destiny, but the ideological justification isn't really there. As a result of Batman and Jim Gordon's lie, the Harvey Dent Act goes into effect and Gotham is no longer plagued by organized crime and corruption. It's just a pretty normal city. The fact that Gotham is so safe is even emphasized in the conversation between John Blake and Jim Gordon when they first meet. So why exactly does Bane want to destroy it? Also, as I mentioned, the method for destroying the city is not as fitting or meaningful this time around. Ra's al Ghul planned to use a fear toxin to spread panic and drive the people of Gotham to tear each other apart. Fear is central to the story of Batman Begins. It begins with Bruce falling into a well and being scared by a bunch of bats, who his father later tells him attacked him out of fear. All creatures feel fear. As a man, Bruce sought to use fear as a weapon against those who would prey on the fearful, thus becoming Batman. Fast forward to the climax and you've got Ra's al Ghul literally using fear as a weapon. Looking at this movie, the themes of fear, overcoming fear, and using fear as a weapon are present from beginning to end, with the endgame of Ra's al Ghul serving as a brilliant cap on everything. Bane just has a bomb. Then we have Talia. Near the end of the movie, Miranda Tate reveals her true identity as the daughter of Ra's al Ghul, who had been working with Bane the whole time. Along with the majority of Batman fans, for me this revelation wasn't really much of a surprise. Even so, the sudden shift in her character didn't have very much of an effect, because with everything that had gone on previously, and all the characters who the movie had attempted to develop, Miranda hadn't made much of an impression on me. Miranda was pretty insignificant when compared to some of the other supporting characters, and even after her identity is revealed, she really doesn't do much. She stabs Batman and takes off to try to make sure the bomb goes off. They stop her, she delivers a short, villainous monologue, and then she dies. Rather terribly, I might add. I probably would have had a little more respect for the character if we got to see her fight either Bruce or Selina. Instead, she just provides an ineffective plot twist and undermines the power Bane holds as the movie's primary antagonist. Possibly my greatest annoyance with this movie comes from the two terribly written romance plots. Bruce becomes involved with Miranda after no real build-up. After meeting a few times earlier in the movie, Miranda arrives at Wayne Manor, finding Bruce out in the rain. They go inside, talk briefly, and start kissing. Then she sleeps with him. To be fair, it's not like they had Bruce fall madly in love with her, but he did seem to care for her. This relationship might have felt more natural if the movie did a better job of illustrating how lonely Bruce felt, instead of just establishing that he had been depressed and isolated. Then we have the Bruce and Selina love story, if you can even call it that. Selina steals from Bruce because she wants access to the clean slate in order to wipe her background and get a new start. Later she deceives and betrays Batman so the League of Shadows will leave her alone. Sure, they had a few moments throughout the movie when Bruce attempted to appeal to the good in her, but the movie never really managed to make it feel like these two belonged together. Their kiss before Bruce took off in the bed felt like it came out of nowhere, even after Selina's very Han Solo-like redemption. I wouldn't have taken much issue with it if they left it there, but they had to take it further. Selina was with Bruce when Alfred saw him at the cafe at the end of the movie. Given Alfred's statement that in his fantasy he hoped to see that Bruce was with a wife, the ending suggests to a certain extent that Selina is the love of Bruce's life. Wife or not, Selina is part of Bruce's happy ending. If that's what they wanted to do, then developing the relationship between these two characters should have been given a much higher priority within the story. The first two movies did a great job of establishing how much Bruce loved Rachel Dawes and what she meant to him, so this movie really needed to put a focus on showing why its chosen love interest was really the one for Bruce, if it wanted the audience to fully buy into it. Given how underdeveloped this relationship was, the cafe scene doesn't work as well as it should as a satisfying end to Bruce Wayne's story. Meanwhile, we have John Blake competing with Selina for the audience's attention as the most important supporting character. If they had chosen to put more emphasis on the John Blake storyline, I can imagine John playing a much more active role by Batman's side during the finale, which would have made the ending to his story more fitting. Overall, the writing for the character was a little bit sloppy. They did a very nice job of establishing him as someone who related to Bruce, but they didn't explain how he figured out Bruce's identity as Batman. This oversight aside, I still like the character of John Blake, and accepting the story the way it is, I don't mind the suggestion that he would play a role similar to that of Terry McGinnis and become Gotham's new protector. However, I absolutely hate that they decided to make his first name Robin. It was just a cheap move that completely missed one of the most important aspects of Robin's role within the world of Batman. The concept of Batman and Robin is about a relationship. John's story is about a young man who is inspired by someone who he can relate to and decides to follow his example. For this to have been a more satisfying version of the Robin story, they had to establish a more powerful connection between these two people and have them play a more significant role in each other's lives. Bruce's interaction with John when he was a kid wasn't direct enough and wasn't shown to be a major influence on the boy's life. John helped Bruce by encouraging him to come back into the world. This was not done as dramatically as it should have been because Bruce just comes out of his 8-year isolation too easily within this story. This leads me to my next point. Most fans would probably agree that the two Batman stories that were most represented in The Dark Knight Rises are Nightfall and The Dark Knight Returns. After seeing the movie, I really don't feel like these two stories complement each other. The Dark Knight Returns features the triumphant return of Batman when he chooses to come out of retirement. Nightfall features the triumphant return of Batman after recovering from a broken back suffered at the hands of Bane. When put together, these two returns detracted from each other. After 8 years of not being Batman anymore, Bruce basically just straps a device onto his leg to help deal with the injury, puts the suit on, and goes right back into action. As frail as Bruce appears in the early scenes of this movie, it would have made sense to show him working to get into good enough physical condition to go out as Batman again. It seems like they chose not to show him doing the necessary training leading up to this return, because they had to show him training later on to recover from what Bane did to him. As a result, this first return feels empty, and the return from retirement aspect of this story doesn't feel like it's executed to full effect. The second return wasn't very dramatic either, partly because the movie had already gone for a "Yay, Batman is back" moment. Also, Bane breaking Batman was not as effective a plot device as it was in Nightfall. In Nightfall, Bane formulates a plan to bring down the seemingly unstoppable Batman at his peak. He targets him specifically, puts him through the ringer, and when Batman has given everything he has, Bane breaks him and presents his broken man to the world so that everyone would know that he had bested the legendary Batman. The Dark Knight Rises didn't really have the same effect of showing the fall of a great hero. This was a Batman who had been out of the game for almost a decade, who lacked the drive and determination that he had before retiring, and was arguably a shadow of his former self in both body and spirit. Unlike Nightfall, Bane was not responsible for the weakening of Batman that allowed for him to be beaten, making his victory feel less earned. The Dark Knight Rises doesn't make Bane's plan to take down Batman feel personal enough for Batman's defeat and return to carry the full weight that they should have. Bane didn't really do much to draw Batman out, so when Batman does come for Bane, it seems like dispatching him and punishing him are just secondary to the larger plan. Bane begins his plan to take over Gotham, and when Batman just happens to come out of retirement to attempt to stop him, he sets a trap to defeat him so that he would be out of the way and suffer for what he had done. All he did to Bruce before the fight was take his money. Bane didn't even make a point of presenting the broken cowl to the world to assert his dominance by showing that Batman was no longer around, leaving no one who could really stand up to him. This would make Batman's return so much more powerful because when the people saw him, they would feel as if hope had returned. As I pointed out earlier, the plan to destroy Gotham wasn't anything new and really didn't make as much sense this time around, so a greater emphasis on the personal revenge aspect would have been more effective. Bane knows Batman's secret identity. If he wants to punish him, why not start by hitting him where it hurts the most and going after Alfred? The Dark Knight Rises never really had me on the edge of my seat with fear for a character's life the way The Dark Knight did with Rachel Dawson and Jim Gordon's family. Sure, the stakes were high in this story, but I never believed that it was going to end with a nuclear explosion that killed millions of people. When I rewatched Batman Begins recently, seeing the scene in which Alfred comforts young Bruce made me realize that if Alfred died in The Dark Knight Rises, I would probably cry my eyes out. Even though it would have made the movie a lot more emotional, I'm not saying that Alfred necessarily should have died. However, putting Alfred in serious danger at some point would have had me genuinely afraid for him and given the movie some of the intensity that it was missing. Another significant part of the story that didn't sit right with me was the handling of Bruce and Alfred's relationship. Michael Caine was great as Alfred while he was around, but he left too soon and stayed away for too long. I also think that as the final part of the story, it would have been nice to see Bruce express some heartfelt appreciation for the person who was there for him when he needed him the most and stood by him for almost his entire life. We got a scene with Bruce expressing his sincere gratitude to Jim Gordon for what he did after Bruce's parents died. It just seemed like the movie was missing something by not having Bruce do anything to really acknowledge the enormously important role that Alfred played in his life. When they see each other at the cafe, it just didn't feel right for Bruce to treat Alfred like an old friend who he appreciated but had no further business with. It would have been more satisfying just to see Bruce mouth the words "thank you" as a very simple and understated way of telling Alfred that he had made an important impact on his life and helped him to reach this point of happiness. Finally, I'd like to reiterate my point that the movie failed to fully develop the individual pieces of the story and tie them all together effectively. Lucius Fox, Peter Foley, and Selina's best friend all got lost in this story. I also really wanted to see more of Jen Gordon. He didn't play a very active role for most of the movie and was not given a very interesting story arc. As I've argued at several points throughout this review, there are a number of story elements in this movie that work against each other. In The Dark Knight, the characters with the most important story arcs are Bruce Wayne, Jen Gordon, and Harvey Dent. The Dark Knight Rises attempts to focus on the stories of 4 characters: Bruce Wayne, Jen Gordon, Selina Kyle, and John Blake. Commissioner Gordon feels very underused compared to the roles he played in the previous stories. Meanwhile, the movie doesn't manage to use either John Blake or Selina Kyle as well as Harvey Dent was used. The movie's ability to develop Bruce's relationship with Selina was hindered by Bruce's romance with Miranda. Maybe if there was less going on, they could have made this into an interesting love triangle that symbolized an internal struggle for Bruce. Miranda would represent Bruce's effort to lead a normal life, while Selina would represent his calling to be Batman and the excitement of that life. Once Miranda was revealed as Talia, the real driving force behind everything that happened, Bane's role as a main villain was just thrown out the window. This was even reflected in the way he was killed off so unceremoniously, and not given a second thought afterward. Bane's dominant presence throughout the movie prevented Talia from feeling like a villainous mastermind the way Ra's al Ghul did when his role was revealed as the Master of Scarecrow. Neither the revenge aspect of the plot or the desire to finish the mission of Ra's al Ghul really worked. I understand that the motivation to destroy Gotham was partly to punish Bruce, but the movie failed to make this revenge feel direct and personal. The mission of Ra's al Ghul no longer made sense because the writers insisted on freeing Gotham of organized crime with the Harvey Dent Act in order to justify the pointless retirement of Batman. Ra's al Ghul was extreme, but everything he did was in the service of his version of justice. Destroying a safe, normal city wasn't serving anyone's idea of justice. If they really wanted to go that route, they should have done away with both the 8-year gap and the Harvey Dent Act. Nightfall and The Dark Knight Returns don't play well together. If they wanted to do an uplifting story about Batman recovering from his defeat and overcoming adversity, it would have worked a lot better to do away with the retirement aspect of the story, so the movie only had one, very dramatic, Return of Batman scene. On the other hand, if they wanted to do an uplifting story about Batman returning from retirement, they needed to make the return the main focus and build up to it. Instead of having Alfred treat Bruce's return to being Batman as a dangerous relapse, it would make more sense for him to encourage it after seeing that Bruce had stopped living life without his mission to drive him. After establishing the reason why Bruce quit being Batman, the movie would take its time and show John Blake attempting to get him back in the game. Bruce would stubbornly refuse at first, but then there would be a dramatic event that shook him out of apathy and motivated him to start training again and don the cowl to fight the evil that threatened Gotham. Using one of these could have been a memorable and powerful story arc, just as the story of Batman being pushed to the limits and enduring was powerful in The Dark Knight. Together, it didn't feel like the true potential of either was fully realized. I realize that my feeling of disappointment with The Dark Knight Rises is not one shared by many fans, but I assure you that I have not written this very critical review of the movie out of some desire to just go against popular opinion and attack a movie that others love. I'm happy for those of you who enjoy the movie, but I hope that I've been able to show you that it is far from perfect. So far, I've done my best to illustrate the flaws with the execution of the movie's story. In an upcoming video, I will argue that the overall story of the movie was entirely the wrong way to go about following The Dark Knight and ending the trilogy. For now, please check out my more in-depth written review, because it has some arguments and ideas that I was not able to include in this version. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked what you saw, please like, comment, subscribe, and tune in next time.